the setting for me picking up this story was the need for a focus for some visiting South Africans that my religious denomination maintains a partnership with. And in South Africa, when you start your meetings, before you start the meeting, you sing hymns, and they just know the words to all these hymns, and they just sit there and they sing them in English and Afrikaans and all these different languages. It's quite remarkable. So I was trying to get this focus out, so I thought I'd sing "We Shall Overcome" because it's really something they know as well as we know, and it's got a story. And I Googled it. And on the Google, the first hit was "We Shall Overcome, Lyndon Baines Johnson." And I went, "Excuse me?" And so I clicked. And the resulting story is interesting, I think you'll find. We shall overcome. We shall overcome. We shall overcome someday. Oh, deep in my heart, I do believe that we shall overcome someday. In an article in May of this last year, Atlantic Magazine did a little profile on Kurt Gowan, who was the man that's one of the authors attributed to that song. He passed away at the age of 83. And they referred to that song as the most powerful song of the 20th century. And its roots are based, interestingly enough, not only in the slavery issue in the abolitionist movement, but the basic melody comes from Beethoven. And it was extant here in the United States about 1794 and adapted for a hymn back then that found its way into those places in the next preceding years. And in 1905, a very famous black pastor named Ethan Tingley put it on paper and put it together with a book of hymns he was writing and using in his church in Philadelphia. It next came to surface in a union organizing effort of black women in Charleston, South Carolina. They were making cigarettes and they wanted to have better conditions and more money. And interestingly enough, they went away to school, to a place called the Highland Center up in Tennessee. And they learned a little bit about organizing. And they brought that song with them. And they brought it home to the streets of Charleston. And it became part of the reconciliation points with the employers, interestingly enough, because it was a reference on probably their common basic Christian faith. The Highland Center was a think tank for justice action issues up in Tennessee. And they took that song and they often used it with folks that were coming to learn how to community organize. And this young guy, Cowan, showed up, and he heard the song sung by the head of the music department there, who had also shared it with a fellow named Pete Seeger, who's from our neighborhood. And Pete Seeger had put it on his first album of the Weavers. And along about that time, they conspired and they said they ought to copyright it because they didn't want anybody else taking it on. So they copyrighted it with 4 people, the 2 folks that were basically at the Highland Center, Cowan and Seeger. Now, it begins to get traction as a social movement when Cowan went down to South Carolina to help some students who were thinking about organizing to create a better focus on the civil rights movement among young people. And he went down there with his guitar, and at the end of the first work session, he kind of started to play his guitar in, if you'll excuse me, in his white honky way. And halfway through, the group stopped him, and they said, "We've got 4 people here that sing a cappella, and you can just put that guitar down." And they sang that song along with the words that had been a little bit adapted by Seeger and Cowan. And the most telling one was they changed "I will overcome" to "we shall overcome." And that made all the difference of including people, because it made it a community song rather than an individual song. And now that organizing group was led by a guy named Stokely Carmichael, who went on to become the president of the founding member of that group, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Council. And Stokely commented about 1968 or 69 that he didn't know how long the group could become or remain nonviolent. He was distressed over the civil rights issues. But he said that when he heard that song, the promise of that song kept him on track with Martin Luther King's dream and the method they started. Now, things happened in the 60s. Things happened in the 50s. Rosa Parks sat on that bus, would not get up. When the man came down the bus line, when the bus got crowded, and moved the sign that said "Coloreds Behind," he said to her, "You got to get up." And she says, "I'm sitting here." And she got arrested for sitting down. And the song was sung in that whole boycotting campaign. Interestingly enough, Rosa had been to the Highland Center for school, so that the fabric of how you communicate things was also sung during Martin Luther King's March on Washington in '63. It was sung at the bridge just before the fire hose and the dogs and all of that stuff that happened at Selma. And 7 days after Selma, after those pictures of all that rough stuff going on because those people were black, Lyndon Baines Johnson came to a joint meeting of Congress. And what he laid out was the Voting Rights Act of 1964. And he did it in a way that was ironic and powerful. It was ironic for him, a poor white man from Texas, growing up in the hill country, to bring together the most significant bit of civil rights legislation since the Emancipation Proclamation. Let me tell you, the times were such that we knew as a country we had to do something, and the irony was here was a Southerner about to do it. It wasn't lost on Johnson either, because he talked about the reality of people being discriminated against. And he told a very powerful story. When I was just a young kid out of college, I was 21 years old, and I was teaching school in a hill country town, and it was a big school. It had 2 rooms. And most of my students were either Chicano or Mexican or black. And they were all poor. And at the end of the day, I thought to myself, as I watched those kids go up the street in their little groups of different colors, I wish I could help them. But I was just a poor boy teaching school. But tell you now, I'm the President of the United States. Come next week, I'm going to send you a bill. And together we're going to help the sons and the grandsons, the granddaughters and the daughters of those children. Because we can, because we must, and it is the right thing to do. And it's a job that's bigger than any one man, even the President of the United States, so I need your help. Because together we can overcome. We shall overcome. That speech is on the top 5 of great oratories of the last century. It may be number 1. Its place doesn't matter. The issue is that it happened, and the world has been different because the power of a message communicated with a song that had a story. We shall overcome.